Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Members of the House and Senate have now been briefed on the strike that killed a top Iranian general last week, and not everyone's happy. Several members of the Trump administration gave the briefing, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Defense Secretary Mark Esper, and CIA Director Gina Haspel. Senators from both parties expressed their dismay with what they were told.
There were so many important questions that they did not answer. We did not see a plan, a satisfying plan for the future. We had 97 senators there. 15 got to ask questions. As the questions began to get tough, they walked out. I've asked for a commitment that they all come back within a week. We have not yet gotten that commitment.
Was probably the worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue, in the 9 years I've served in the United States Senate. What I found so distressing about that briefing was that one of the messages we received from the briefers was, do not debate, do not discuss the issue of the appropriateness of further military intervention against Iran. And that if you do, you'll be emboldening Iran. Now, I find this insulting and demeaning, not personally, but to the office that each of the 100 senators in this building happens to hold.
The briefing also did not impress House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who says her chamber will vote on a war powers resolution to limit the president's ability to use military force in Iran. Two Republican senators, Mike Lee, whom you just heard, and Rand Paul, have signaled their support for a resolution. Tehran launched missile strikes on two bases in Iraq where U.S. troops are stationed, the Al-Assad Air Base and the Erbil Air Base. Both are more than 100 miles from the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. Video from state TV shows the Iranian military launching the missiles on the two bases. There were no American or Iraqi casualties in the attack. A defense official tells CBS News the U.S. had, quote, multiple hours of warning prior to the attack, giving troops plenty of time to take shelter in bunkers. On Twitter, Iran's foreign minister called the strike proportionate measures. He also said, quote, we do not seek escalation or war, but will defend ourselves against any aggression. Wednesday morning, President Trump praised the U.S. military for taking precautions to prevent deaths or injuries. He also announced new economic retaliation against Tehran.
As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior.
CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins me now with more from the Pentagon. David, you just got out of a briefing with Defense Secretary Esper and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair Milley. What can you tell us?
Well, they gave us the latest details on this attack, so I'll just run through those very quickly. They say the missiles, there were 16 in all. They were launched from 3 locations inside Iran. 11 of the missiles landed at Al-Assad Air Base. 1 landed at Erbil, farther north, and 4 failed. But beyond those details, I think the most interesting thing was that both Esper and Milley were asked about this line of reasoning that's been going around that the Iranians were aiming to miss, that they were just trying to land some explosives inside a base without killing anybody so that they could say they had retaliated for the killing of Soleimani without drawing a U.S. military response. General Milley said it's his professional opinion that these missiles, which hit taxiways, parking lots, a helicopter in one case, were intended to kill people. So he is not buying the theory that Iran was just aiming to miss. And he attributes the fact that nobody was killed to the early warning that the troops that those bases had, they were able to take shelter and be safe from the attacks. They also, I thought, cleared up one other story that's been going around, which is that the Iraqi prime minister got a phone call from the Iranians on the night of the attack, telling them the attack was imminent, and that he passed that heads up along to the Americans. So in other words, the Iranians were telegraphing their punches, giving everybody time to take shelter. And General Milley said that was the first he'd heard of that. And Secretary of Defense Esper said it was the other way around. The U.S. warned Iraq when its intelligence system started to detect the preparations for a launch. And I guess one other final point that they made, this ain't over. General Milley said that they fully expect these Iranian-backed militias inside inside Iraq, which are trained, supported, and sometimes directed from Iran. He expects those militias will continue attacking American troops inside Iraq and other U.S. installations in places like Lebanon.
A lot of new information to unpack there, David, but I want to take a step back for a moment. We heard President Trump say that the United States is still evaluating its options after last night's strike. What specifically could they be looking at?
Well, I think basically what he's saying is that they want to see the Iranian reaction to what they've done. He said in his speech, Iran is standing down. But then, of course, his speech will have an effect on Iran, too, because nobody in the world was listening more closely to that speech than the Iranians. So now that he's delivered that speech, the U.S. is going to be watching for further reactions from Iran, and I think that's what he meant when he said evaluating their options. Secretary Esper just said here a minute ago that they're taking it day by day. And when he was asked, well, how about how much longer before you start bringing all these reinforcements that you sent, like the brigade from the 82nd Airborne, back home? And he said that's not even on the table yet.
All right, David Martin with the new information at the Pentagon for us. David, thank you.
Sure thing.
And Nancy Cook, Mike DeBonis, and Robbie Gramer join me now. Nancy covers the White House for Politico. Mike covers Congress for the Washington Post. And Robbie covers diplomacy and national security for Foreign Policy. Welcome to all of you. Mike, let me start with you. What do we know about what lawmakers were actually told by the Trump administration?
Well, there were a lot of questions about the rationale for the attack on Qasem Soleimani. They didn't get a lot of precise intelligence. CIA Director Haspel, according to multiple people in these briefings, gave a general overview of the intelligence and the reasons for this attack, but she certainly did not get into details. One Republican congressman said, they basically said the intelligence was good and left it at that. Coming out, though, there was obviously a split opinion. Democrats generally want more answers on this. They don't believe that they've met the threshold of an imminent attack on American lives, on the American homeland. Republicans, on the other hand, generally, with the noted exception of Mike Lee, believe that the relevant questions have been answered. The president had the legal authority to do what he did. He had the intelligence justification to do it, and they're perfectly happy with the way this has turned out.
You mentioned Mike Lee. What did you make of the kind of reaction, Mike, that we saw from Senator Lee?
Well, Senator Lee's always been concerned about the prerogatives of Congress, the powers of Congress to declare war, to have a role in conducting foreign policy. He's been very protective and very wary of giving up congressional powers to the president in the national security arena. So this is not a new issue for him. So it's not surprising necessarily that he would raise it. I think it was surprising the way that he raised it, that he came out and accused these briefers of being un-American and trying to cut out Congress from their role in declaring war, making foreign policy. He used some very strong words that we probably weren't expecting, but the fact that he was concerned about this issue was not that surprising.
Well, Nancy, can you explain how the Trump administration is justifying its strike on Soleimani?
Well, that's a good question, and we haven't actually gotten that many more details. President Trump, during his speech today, talked about how, again, there was an imminent threat on Americans, but the thing is that even the senators haven't gotten more information from these classified briefings, and I think that that's a real ongoing question as to why the Trump administration felt like it had to take out Soleimani at this particular time, and what the actual justification was for it. And I wasn't on the Hill today, but it sounds like from what Mike is saying, that senators also didn't really feel like they had great answers to that. And it's interesting to me that Republicans are even raising questions about it. And we did not learn more details about that justification from the president's speech today.
Yeah, I mean, Robbie, what are you hearing from your vantage point about this imminent threat that the administration has cited in justifying the attack? Because we're going on several days now of questions about that specific point, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of additional clarity.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Secretary Pompeo, in a press briefing to reporters earlier this week, said if you want to know about imminence, look at the events leading up to the attack on the U.S. embassy that precipitated Soleimani's assassination. But beyond that, the press is just as in the dark as Capitol Hill is, as lawmakers are, as to the specifics of the attacks that Soleimani was planning to orchestrate before Trump ordered his killing.
Mike, let me ask you, Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that the House will vote Thursday on a war powers resolution to limit the president's ability to use military force in Iran. What exactly does this resolution entail, and is it likely to pass the House?
To answer the second question first, I think it is going to pass the House. It's very rare for the speaker to bring something up that she doesn't know isn't going to pass. What it does is basically makes it clear to the president that he would have to come to Congress to launch a strike on Iran itself. Nothing in this would have prevented what the president did regarding the killing of Qasem Soleimani. What this does is sort of set a political marker for Democrats, and saying that, we're warning you, if you're going to escalate, take this to another level, actually strike the Iranian homeland, then we're telling you right now, you have to involve us. We are expecting some degree of bipartisan crossover on this. It may not be that much, but there are some Republicans who are hinting that they're inclined to assert Congress's role here. Obviously, on the Senate side, Mike Lee and Rand Paul are making themselves heard as being in that camp. Senator Tim Kaine is expected to force a vote on a companion measure in the Senate sometime soon.
And Nancy, to follow up here, should the White House be concerned that you have two Republican senators who are in favor of some kind of resolution?
Well, I think that it's a loss to them because they certainly like to pride themselves on the impeachment and everything else as GOP unity. And Senator Mike Lee is a concerning voice for them. He is someone who Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, is in constant contact with. He's definitely someone that the White House talks to a lot. And so I think the fact that he is such an ardent supporter of the Trump White House on so many key things like impeachment trial, judicial nominations, I think the fact that he's raising concerns about the justification of the killing of Soleimani is very significant, and I think that the White House will have to respond to him.
So, Robbie, much has been written about Secretary Pompeo this week. Politico called him President Trump's shadow Secretary of Defense, and the Washington Post wrote that Soleimani's killing follows a long push from Pompeo for aggressive action against Iran. Help us understand Pompeo's history with Iran.
Yeah, well, I think this whole incident has clearly shown how Pompeo has emerged as one of, if the not most powerful voice, besides the president himself, inside the administration. Reportedly, Pompeo had been pushing for a much harder line on, or a much harder response to Iran than other members of the administration. Part of this goes back to the Benghazi attacks back in 2011. Then Congressman Pompeo was on the committee that investigated the State Department's and Hillary Clinton's response to the Benghazi attacks. And so this recent attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, it's really clear from talking to the experts and officials that Pompeo and his team did not want another Benghazi on their hand and were looking for a much stronger response than before. I think another important element to consider here is that Pompeo has been a driving force behind Trump's Iran strategy from the beginning, this strategy of maximum pressure, of not giving an inch, and of trying to convince European allies and others that are party to the Iran deal that Trump hates so much to abandon the deal and try to piece together something new to contain Iran.
Well, Nancy, President Trump says new and punishing sanctions are coming for Iran. Is this something he can impose by himself, or does he need congressional approval?
Well, he can certainly, talk about them. He will need congressional approval to do them. But, sanctions has been, an element that the Trump administration, particularly Secretary Mnuchin at the Treasury Department, has been very amped up about doing. To me, what was so interesting about the last, let's say, 48 hours was just how much President Trump backed down from this over-the-top, very tough guy rhetoric to Iran to something that was much more measured today, where he talked about imposing sanctions. He talked about urging NATO to get involved in the Middle East. And that's really a real about-face for him on how he's been dealing with Iran over the last week.
Robbie, are sanctions alone likely to cause more retaliation from Iran?
The officials and experts I've spoken to say no for a few reasons. First, it's clear that both Iranian leaders and Trump are looking for an off-ramp here after his speech this morning, where, as Nancy said, he sort of did an about-face on the escalatory and dramatic rhetoric that might have led to a wider conflict. And the second is that there's really not much left to sanction in Iran. The Iranian economy for years, for decades, has been under really stringent sanctions, not only from the U.S., but from European allies, from the international community. So adding more sanctions onto Iran doesn't dramatically change the calculus here.
All right, Nancy Cook, Mike DeBonis, and Robbie Gramer, thank you all very much.